Thank you for coming to listen to the panel about atoms and bits. We're a bunch of industrial designers up here. First, we have Maaike Simonian. He's an award-winning designer. He's on Forbes' 100 Most Creative list. And he's working at Google X and trying to envision successful designs that have huge business impact. Then we have lovely Victoria Slaker. And she was one of the founders and of ammunition design and the design team over there, and has been a part of designing some of the most successful consumer electronics products on the market today. Then we have Michael Ditullo, and he's the Chief Creative Officer at Sound United, I'm sorry. And he's been wearing a lot of different hats, doing everything from ethnographic research to marketing and design. Then we have Maaike Evers, and she is also working at Google X and is leading design from the very early stages that have a huge impact. And she also co-founded Maaike and Maaike. And then we have Josh Morenstein, an old friend of mine, and he's co-founded and is partner of Branch Design, a young design studio in San Francisco. And he's been working on a bunch of really, really successful products on the market. And then last but not least, we have Mitch Mitchell, good friend of mine too, Heinrich. He is a senior designer, but also the founder of Design Kitchen at Google X. And he is very excited about going back to being designer as prototypers, as manufacturers, and really understanding how things can be made beautifully. So to start with, to kick off this panel, I asked the panel to think about a design or a product that represents the future of design, and also something that incorporates hardware and software in an interesting way. So let's start with Maaike. You chose the Tesla. How come?
So the reason I think that Tesla represents the future of hardware and software integration, two reasons. One is the ability to receive updates in a really significant way that I actually consider to almost be like over-the-air hardware updates. An example is that the vehicle recently didn't have to be recalled because of an issue. They actually just did a software update, and it changed the characteristics of the vehicle in a way that avoided an entire recall. Another example is the way that the vehicle's ride height can be adjusted. They, over the air, can just change the ride height of all of their vehicles at a certain speed to adjust the vehicle's performance instantly. In the other approach I think they've taken that I think is really interesting and relates probably to a lot of the products here is the ability to learn. I think that's something that that our products in the future are really becoming more and more like humans, and they're able to learn. And an example on the Tesla is you can change the ride height. If you go onto a certain driveway, you can adjust the ride height. And the next day, if you do the same thing, eventually it learns that you want the ride to change the height right there so you don't scrape the driveway, and it will just do it automatically.
So I'm curious, whose role is it to envision an idea like that? Is it an industrial designer, user experience designer, or how do you come up with something like this?
I think the only way that happens is when people step outside of their roles, because in traditional product development, everything is so siloed that these ideas don't necessarily come up unless you're thinking about the whole system. And so I think it's everybody on the project's ability to just seep into the other, like get their hands in the other people's business and come up with these ideas.
So it's interesting, Victoria, you chose kind of an old idea, a little bit of a difference from Maaike's example.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek example. This is the Phantom Doorman, and it's something that we take for granted a lot. It was actually done in the 30s by George Duval, and it really, for me, I chose it because it represents two trends, and they're both around simplicity. One is this idea of having the software, having this sort of interaction. Sometimes I feel like if we didn't have these doors built in the 30s, actually, if we were to do it today, there'd be this expectation of having to bring out your phone to actually open a door. So that the first part of it is really about simplicity of the interaction that we're seeing really happening a lot. And then the other one is this idea of very, very basic objects, going back and revisiting things that we thought were already done, and starting to look at them with what we can do, incorporating software to make them better, to have them do more things. An example of that we've done in-house is a little product called Leo, 2 E's, 1 O. And it was kind of an interesting take. I mean, we'll talk about the Nest in a little bit, but what this client did was say, well, everybody has all of these smoke detectors right now in their homes. How can we make them smarter with a very simple device? And what they did was they said, well, we'll take a nightlight and we'll just have it listen. And it'll listen, and you can go out, and it's kind of like sitting at home saying, like, yeah, you go out, I'll just hang out here, and if anything goes wrong, I'll let you know. And it's such a simple act, but it basically suddenly makes a product that you really took for granted much more clever. And so it's just kind of, for me, it's about the idea of simple interactions, not a lot of onus on the user. You can walk up to a door, or you can just walk out of your house and not have to think twice. And then the other one is very simple objects becoming smarter.
So that's a really great transition to your project. Congratulations, it's just launched. Yeah, tell us about it.
Well, to riff off of what Victoria said, so this is a collection of speakers that my company just launched that are all Wi-Fi connected. And the average American home has 3 to 5 speakers in it. And once all of those speakers are Wi-Fi connected, there's a lot of different things you can do. But to do that, you have to be thinking of those use cases at the very first stages of the hardware, right? It's like you're basically building a smart home, but you're building a smart home kind of Lego brick by Lego brick, and you have to make sure those bricks will all interconnect at some point, whether it's with a Leo or with a Nest. And if you're not thinking that way, you'll have these kind of orphan things that are in the home that are smart and yet dumb at the same time. And so I think that's a really interesting part of hardware development, is kind of where we're predicting where we think the software is going to go, but at a much earlier timeline, right? And then eventually we're manufacturing those products. They're on a boat from Asia, and the software is still being developed, and the products come into a warehouse in the United States, and they all get updated, and then they get shipped to retail, and they land in people's homes, and then they get updated again. So where the software you can keep iterating on and improving, you have to build the hardware to be flexible enough to be able to do that from the very onset. So it's been an interesting challenge to reinvent these traditional products that we take for granted and bring them into this larger ecosystem.
So talking about products that we take for granted and then has not in the past been thought through, the Nest came along and revolutionized the thermostat. Maaike, what do you think about it?
Thank you all for taking all my words out of my mouth. But maybe I'd like to add one more thing to why I chose this particular product as an example of where the future is going to go. I think this is an excellent example where Tony Fidel had a very strong vision and was able to corral a group of very different, from different backgrounds, engineers, hardware engineers, software engineers, EE, design, web design, app design, packaging, marketing. Everything was so well orchestrated to come to this moment. And that's such a difficult thing to do, considering all the different timelines, the different backgrounds. Like, how do you keep that sort of the greater goal, the greater vision intact through that difficult process? And so, yeah, it's, to me, a great example of a well-curated hardware experience that lives throughout, all the little bits and sort of feelings that you get from different touch points that we have with this product.
So do you think the role of the designer in the future is to wear all these hats, or is all that's required a strong leader in this case?
Well, I actually don't know how this was conceived by Tony or how strong of a message he had. If anybody of you know, I'd love to hear it. But maybe it's a very strong personality that has a really great idea and vision and knows exactly where this is going to land. Maybe it is just the right people coming together and crafting that story together. I think designers, since hardware designers have to start always really early because hardware takes so long. So sometimes these bits of the DNA of where this product is going to end up are starting at hardware thinking or the first concept phase of thinking. So sometimes we do take on that role, but it gets infused with many great talented people, the hardware engineers, software engineers, everybody. But yeah, so I'd love to hear if anybody knows like how this particular product was developed so well. But I've seen it done both ways. Sometimes it's a very strong vision up front that you get to work with. Sometimes it's working with people to get to that magic idea.
Josh, you chose an example that I think some of us have a love-hate relationship to, the 3D printing machine.
Yeah. Well, first I would qualify it by saying I didn't choose this particular product that you're seeing here because I thought it was like the epitome of 3D printing, or whether it's good or bad industrial design or interaction design. But what they seem to be talking about, because it's on Kickstarter, I haven't seen it in person, is a level of accessibility that I don't see in a lot of other products of this sort. They sell MakerBot at Home Depot, and the thing that we talk about in our studio all the time, because we have a 3D printer running literally we have a couple of different 3D printers in the office, and it's running constantly. Because for us, it's all about getting stuff in our hands, about moving from paper or sketches or digital format to having something in our hands. Because ultimately, most of what we do in the studio is around that physical experience. But my dad goes to Home Depot, and my dad could buy a MakerBot, and he wouldn't know what to do with it, right? I mean, but he's got little measuring tape suspenders and a pencil protector, and he has no idea how to work in 3D CAD. And these guys, at least, are talking about the first stages of bringing that limitation of getting it from your sketch into the real world. I think it's pretty rudimentary. You can make like a label for your fridge right now, or maybe you can do flat jewelry, which isn't that interesting. Maybe ultimately, I think you'll run out of energy. But I think it's a first start. The downside for me is that it puts the design tool that's been that limitation. It puts it in everybody's hand, and so I think I had a bunch of different ideas that I was gonna, when Isabelle asked this somewhat difficult, borderline annoying question, because I couldn't come up with anything. Everything kind of had a good and a bad side. And I was like, God, I'm such a negative person. But the bad side of this is that it puts design and the making of objects into anybody's hands. And the question I was asking myself was, should it be in anybody's hands? I think most of us, if not all of us, are trained and we have an expertise. There's a permanence in objects when it comes to industrial design that has implications, cultural implications, certainly ecological implications. And so my thought was, if we can all make things, should we all be making things? Should we be prototyping stuff? Yes. Should we be producing stuff? I don't know. I'm not allowed to fly an airplane with passengers on it. So should anybody be allowed to just go out and make objects and mass produce things? So that was sort of the balance that I was thinking. So it was a good and bad side of the future of design.
Can I riff off that for a second? Because we were talking backstage about this, and I think it's interesting because everybody in this room has the ability to write a novel on the thing that you're typing on, and I haven't written any novels yet. And so just because you have a tool doesn't mean you will use it. Or you might try to start writing that novel and be like, I suck at this. I'm going to go to the store and buy a novel. And you might try to design something and 3D print it, and you might be like, yeah, you know what? No.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I see it more as like owning a drill. Everybody should have a drill. Everybody should be able to fix their own stuff, right? And this is another version of that. Everybody should be able to make things for whatever reasons they need to have it around.
Yep.
I also think that you would think that it would actually just elevate good design because people would realize that it's hard once this tool is in everybody's hands and they realize that they're unable to create that iPhone on their 3D printer and that they can't hit that level of fidelity and that level of polish, that they realize, okay, it actually puts you in a better light as a designer.
You're right. This is going to make me look amazing.
So Mitch, you like to build stuff.
I do.
And you chose a sort of a building.
I did.
The idea.
So I took a little bit of a different tack on this question. I was thinking about it, and actually good segue from Josh. I was thinking about it more from a professional standpoint, and it's actually more about the tools that designers are getting, software tools, that are allowing us to do our job in more interesting and better ways. So this particular structure is in Germany, and it was designed by Algorithm, and it was fabricated with CNC robotics. It's an unsupported structure, and it fits together like a puzzle. So the idea is that each individual piece is different from all the other ones. They have these interlocking sections, and it's an unsupported structure. So there's actually no columns or supports inside. And I guess it's about 20 feet by 60 feet or something like that. So it's pretty big. The volume of the thing compared to the actual structure is actually, it's more impressive than an egg. So if you think about the shell of an egg, this is about half as thin for the same size. And that just wouldn't really be possible if it were a person doing that design by hand. So the algorithm kind of figured out how to puzzle these things together and how to make it work just so. And I feel like moving into the future, designers are going to have more of these tools at their disposal, and complexity kind of comes for free. And so it's going to open some interesting doors for how we produce things in the real world.
This reminds me of an interesting take on sustainability. You're creating something extremely complex, but so lightweight and so efficient. How do we think about that with the new tools that we have with 3D printing, but also having to create things a lot faster, perhaps fueled by how fast software design development happens? What's your take on that, Mike?
I think that there's a little bit of a challenge there because, especially if we're talking about technology products, with sort of accelerating change, if you think about Moore's Law and you think about how quickly things need to be updated and how quickly we have an opportunity to update things to be better and better, we're going to be producing more and more products that will get outdated faster and faster. And so that goes right up against sustainability in terms of like waste. And I don't have an answer there. One approach could be to accept an object's impermanence, which could be totally an about face for where we are now, where we kind of celebrate how precious objects are. Maybe in order to accept that they're going to be outdated really fast, maybe they should be made out of materials and processes that are made to biodegrade. Just like a milk carton is not made out of milled aluminum because you're going to throw it out when the milk is gone. Maybe that's how we should treat our technology products.
In your experience, Victoria, do you think that's something that customers will accept? We've been spoiled with these polished, beautiful pieces of metal objects. And do you think in the future people will accept having a phone made out of milk carton material?
I don't know. We actually might have to mandate that one. I do think there is a lot of positives to the idea of the acceleration. If you sort of combine the two issues of, you can have a 3D printer or, you're changing the materials, I think people will accept it if there's a clear-cut benefit. So you could say, there's the dark side, like you're going to 3D produce a lot of crap. But you could also say, well, it might actually be more efficient in a lot of ways. You could have, instead of everybody having to put out a small, medium, and large of a product, if you're making it at home, you have an infinite sizing. You can make it exactly what you want, and maybe there'll be less waste because of that. And that's a benefit. In terms of whether or not people are going to accept the timelines of hardware, I think there is an expectation, and we talked about it backstage, of the merciless sort of crowds. Once they put their money into Kickstarter, they're like, where the hell's my product? There's some education that's going to have to happen, I think, but there's no doubt that the direction of hardware and software design is just faster and faster, for good and for bad.
So talking about speed, we have representatives of people who are in-house designers in startups and from consultancy background. Where can you actually get the most done as a designer?
Oh, consultancies all the way.
I'm with you.
Yeah, right on.
Amazing.
I
You're
wish
the
I had a
best.
different opinion, but it is true. You can get more done as a consultant.
Oh.
And you do a lot more variety of work. And creatively, it's more interesting.
I guess I'll take
However, I do feel that as a designer in-house, there's so much to be done. Even though it's hard and you're pushing a boulder up the hill, there is so much to be done in corporations. So I feel like there is a reason for us to migrate into that spot and help elevate design, but also just sort of infiltrate with ideas and with examples to show how it can actually be really delightful.
Just to riff off of that, I mean, like Mike and Maaike, I've worked at consultancies like Frog, and I've worked in-house at companies like Nike, and both have their advantages. They're just really different, and I think it depends on the organization that you're interacting with. What I love about being in-house now, again, like I liked at Nike, was having the opportunity to be a complete evangelist for design, right? And being able to talk to the board of directors and say, this is our vision, this is where we're going, we need you to believe. Sometimes you have the opportunity to do that as a consultant as well. Like I know Victoria, you guys interact a lot with the C-suite, and we've talked about that. And I think it's less about in-house or consulting and more about at what level are you engaging with the organization, right? So can you get up to the top and not only talk to the decision makers, but be a decision maker? In the role I have now, it's both a great luxury and a great risk, right? Because it's also nobody's fault but your own. And some people thrive off of that, and some people it's terrifying. But
so I want to riff off of that for a second, because I come from a startup background before joining Google, and I think actually startups are the best of everything in that perspective, because your only limitations are how much time you want to put in. You're owning the full stack. You're able to do everything. And budgets can be a limitation, and just how much effort you want to put into it is a limitation. But in terms of your ability to execute on your creative vision, it's so fulfilling, because you just go for it, and no one's going to tell you no.
And I think that's why maybe you're seeing more consultancies partnering, like truly partnering in terms of taking equity with a startup, because we really appreciate the idea of that we're wholly invested, and it is no holds barred. You really are having a common goal, and there's not somebody saying, okay, well, your initial proposal was for $100,000 and you're at 97 and we got to let you go. So it's really changed sort of in the last probably 5-10 years. It's changed the dynamic, and we have some of the benefits of both worlds that way within some of the consultancies. I mean, Josh, you guys are doing some of that as well.
Yeah, I think my dad was an industrial designer, but he was like 1964. I don't know, they designed drill presses or something, and garden shears. But the role that he played was so back room. There was no exposure to any of sort of they still did visionary stuff. They did beautiful drawings and had beautiful ideas, and there were amazing products that came out of that era and eras before that and eras since then. But the role that the designer played, or the industrial designer in this case played, was more utilitarian than visionary. Or at least that was where they were plugged into the hierarchy. And I think now it's very much the case, and I think we're all saying the same things, whether it's about being in a startup or in-house. I think culturally, designers are at the very beginning of the process, and in the most successful projects, they're there at the very, very end when something comes off of the line, whatever that line is, whether it's a manufacturing aspect or whether it's launching an app or some other form of software. So I think that's what it boils down to, is our involvement and how many times we're allowed to touch within the process.
So thinking about the evolution of the designer, and you are all design leaders, you have your own teams. How should we build teams for the future? Is it brand and design? Is it graphic design? Is it there's a lot of talk about how software and hardware design need to integrate better. How do you build the ideal foolproof team for the future? Mike.
Wow. I actually think it really depends on the product, and I think we need to really pay attention to where products are going. And I kind of see, like, if you break down a product historically, products always had like some sort of interface, and whether that's a series of buttons or a knob, and there was like the user and the product. And now there's like sort of 3 levels of intelligence that have to go into a product. There's the user-facing part. There's the intelligence that the product has inside of it and how it learns. And then there's the backside where there's the sort of over-the-air updates and the company that makes it, their side of the product. So in terms of like building a team to develop products, I think if we're talking about products of the future, I think you're going to need people that can represent all of those aspects of the product and design systems, not products.
But just, I think as a just purely design, how to create the best culture for design to live. I really feel there's a little bit of it needs to be cultivated in a little bit of a separate entity. It tends to be culturally so different from the technical staff and the business staff that they almost need a little bit of a safe haven to be protected and to let them be a little odd and different and creative and have stuff up and be messy and be a little rough and let that not confuse the rest of the company. So I think there is a need for a slight sort of separation or like a cultivation where design can do its best and can actually bring its best and incubate its best.
Josh, you've just built kind of a new studio. How are you thinking about this topic?
Well, I mean, we kind of build as we go a little bit because it's a new studio. We're a little bit more bootstrapped, but in the past year and a half, the team's grown from being just my partner Nick and myself sitting around thinking, okay, now what are we going to do? And of course, the first folks that we brought in were industrial designers, but now we have traditional graphic design and branding and interaction. When we work on programs, well, all of our programs require some sort of mechanical engineering. Instead of bringing people like that in-house, we partner with folks because we think that it's better to have other specialists, people who bring different culture in. And I don't know, we'll see what happens. At the last studio I ran, we had more work, and as the work kept coming in, we kept kind of building. But ultimately, it was really about being very curatorial about the types of people we brought in. They had to be passionate, they had to be excited about the work, and they had to have taste and experiences, and not just design experiences, they had to have life experiences, because that's kind of selfishly what gets me excited, and that's what got me excited about doing the programs and kind of what they could bring.
Talking about experience, what is it that interaction designers and software engineers can learn from the process of industrial design and hardware development?
Well, I'm not going to tell you guys what I can tell you, but the thing that I think is very, very distinctive about product design or industrial design, tangible product, is the permanence that it has. We create something and it takes a certain amount of time. It's very difficult to compress it any more than it has so far. Maybe 3D printers will change this, but in 9 months to a year, something comes out and it's mass produced and there's no changing it, or it's very, very, very difficult to change it. So I think having an understanding of that, and I would say conversely, a better understanding from industrial design of how sort of the digital side happens, because that's often changing at the last minute, and in the case of Tesla, can be changed on the fly. I think that's the dynamic that creates something really interesting, is that organic nature.
But it's so different. I mean, think of like a pair of Chuck Taylors. They were designed 100 years ago. They still sell $2 billion worth of that shoe every year, right? Like, what piece of software is going to be used in 100 years? And so that's being made right now. And so it's such a different discipline, but yet there's like a riffing and a natural friction that hopefully is going to make both of our work better as our things integrate more and more and more, right? I mean,
Mike, is there something you've learned from software engineers and software development that you felt affected your process in a positive way?
Yeah, I think the initial reaction I had working with a lot of software engineers was kind of disbelief at how they're willing to wait until improvement happens naturally. It's sort of like the hockey stick mentality of development. That really surprised me, because industrial design, you kind of have the reverse. You have to establish a lot up front because you're about to invest in tooling, and you have to have everything all staged and ready to go. And then you spend a lot of time just making sure that it achieves that vision. And I think there's a balance there, because I've seen a lot of software development where the end result, features get piled on, and it's not really predictable. And then at the end, if they're really good, you can get it all together and ship a really great product. But I think that you could have a balance there where you have a little bit more vision up front and make some really strong commitments, but then don't the downfall for hardware is you don't have the ability to improve at the last minute. And I think that's where a lot of magic happens in software, where you're like, okay, let's try this, and let's change things right before it's ready to go out.
So how can we work better together, hardware and software, and atoms and bits, and kind of coming together a little bit better? Anybody?
Maaike?
How do we do it?
I think I said it earlier. I think it's all about having a good vision to start with. So if that's there, and if it's not there, it needs to be created. So you have to get a great synergy between people to build it.
But how do you do that?
How do you do that? Trust. Developing a lot of trust and great respect for teammates, and building upon their strengths to get to that, to carve out that best nugget that everything holds onto.
To tie two of your questions together, Isabelle, I think the team building aspect and what you look for also ties into this question. My approach has been to build teams of hybrids, so people who can speak multiple languages, the hardware and the software. And I think that being able to connect with your peers on that same level, and to be able to speak intelligently about what they have on their plate, as well as your specific craft, is super important to maintaining product fidelity and achieving a vision.
What's your advice?
I think the key for us is to have one team, to not have a hardware team, and to not have a software team, but to have one team that's bonded to a single vision and working together. And software people involved really early on, like giving feedback to the hardware, and hardware people involved all the way to the last software launch, giving feedback on the software. And I mean, we have the distinctions in the disciplines on the team, but it's one team. And I think that's, to me, the best way to do it.
Going back to the idea of like hardware and software interaction and how they influence each other, especially when you project forward into the future and you think about all of the traditions of building objects, I think they're all going to get redefined. And I think the hardware development process is going to look closer to the software. It's going to look more like software development. And I think that's a really big opportunity for both industrial designers and interaction designers as we both sort of admit that we're creating experiences. And I think I see a lot of interaction designers that are super interested in industrial design, especially more and more lately. And I think that interaction is going to not be relegated to the screen as it kind of has been in the past. And I just love to look forward. I look forward to like that mixing more and more as hardware processes become more flexible.
Please come and get us afterwards if you have any questions one-on-one, and hopefully you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.